If you'd like to know how to win in the Scandinavian defense without making any mistakes, then you've come to the right place. It's Grandmaster Max Illingworth here, and in this training, I'm going to show you a game I played against a 2-250 FIDE player in Blitz, where I managed to defeat them against this annoying Bishop B5 system without making a single mistake. And here's how I did it. I played the move of Knight B to D7, which is my sort of Portuguese style preference most of the time with black. Yeah, the move Bishop D7 is also possible, but Knight D7, like I covered in yesterday's video, is simply a lot more fun. And don't worry, we are also going to get to a nice game against C4 as well that I promised I'd cover yesterday. We will cover that a bit later. But first, let's see how my game against Pig Coach went. Now, this is a move I played quite a bit against this guy, where I remember in the past he would play C4 and kind of let me go B5 and just get this very nice compensation, as I was kind of talking about in yesterday's vid, which I'll put a link to in due course. But my opponent, he was prepared for this and he knew that the correct way to play is to play the move D4 and then the move of Knight to F3. And at this point, I actually went for a line that I recommend in my Play the Strongest Scandinavian 2025 course, which you might notice the image here on this video talking a bit about it, which I modified a little bit for this one. But yeah, basically, even the line I sort of came up with, there weren't really any super instructive games in the database. So I'm really excited to be able to show you actually a high-level example of how to win with the little system I developed. Now, before I show you that system I came up with, do make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. You can also subscribe if you are new to the channel for more bits like this one, because we do have a lot of good Scandi content planned. So in the old days, they would play either something like e6 and just let white kind of take over the center with something like c4 and something like this, just giving white a very nice advantage. For example, c5, it kind of thwarts black's plan of hitting back in the center. Um, Whereas, let's say, if white does play it more passively, this game between Lalo against Nolte against Lalo in the Keystone City Tournament 2023. Yeah, this is sort of an example of what black's aiming for with this system, that you just want to get the queenside majority structure. The fact you're hitting their bishop doesn't mean that you get pretty comfortable equality, and I'm not going to show every single move of the game. That's more for the students of the course with the PGN file. You'll be able to see how black kind of outplayed his opponent, just use some of the weaknesses against white to ultimately win the game as such. Oh, another way to play it, and this is a bit of a funny transposition, is if you play c6, which is a move that most masters play here. I actually think that's a move white's very happy to see, because after bishop e2, believe it or not, we've actually transposed into another opening, namely the Alekan defense. But it's kind of a good version of Alekan, where white's just going to grab the space, something like, this, for example, and just enjoy a very comfortable and very pleasant advantage out of the opening. So it's not something I can really recommend in good conscience for black, because we're just going to be very short of counterplay in a position like this without a pawn break. But if you are wondering how it transposes to the Alekan, basically if we were to take this kind of move order, with the Alekan and the sort of modern main line of takes in c6. Well, if black, instead of playing the normal bishop f5, were to play knight d7, and white plays knight f3 just to leave our bishop and knight stuck and to enjoy their space advantage, well, it would transpose exactly to the position we saw here. So you might be wondering, well, what's the solution? Well, we've kind of seen that a common thread is that the move c4 is very annoying. And so the approach I developed with a bit of the help of the engine is to play a6 here. And then when they retreat the bishop, we then play the move of b5 to hold back c4. That's what I end up playing in the game, where from going to computer, white's probably best off playing a4 immediately, but in the game, white instead played castles and then played the move of a4. And also notice, by the way, that if white does try to go after the b5 pawn with c4 instead, then in that case, we're just going to take and we get this very nice outpost for the knight to kind of, make up for the slightly slow development. White's just not really in a position to exploit the weaknesses, and given that they have an IQP as well, and we also have ways to kind of open up the center, it means that black is just going to be completely fine in this position, and there are even other move orders as well that also would be fine, like bishop e7 is, another way you can play it as well that might be even more flexible again. But really, it's a matter of taste at this point. If white plays a quiet move like c3, trying to make a4 work a little bit more effective, so they can go c4 without worrying about en passant. However, we can cut across this plan with the move c5, which is a nice little move order trick. And it's all like very fresh territory, virtually no games being played in these lines I'm showing you here. But after a4 and b4, in this version, c4 is just a bit less effective. They can try to play d5 and push in the center to avoid that very comfortable, queenside majority structure that I was showing just beforehand from the Lalo game. But d5 is just not really that critical. Even if they play rook e1, trying to, avoid something like bishop d6 and the blockade of the pawn. Even then, black's still doing quite fine. The line goes a little bit sort of deep, but it eventually gets to a position where even though white has compensation for the pawn, black's doing a pretty good job at neutralizing it. And this line I'm sort of fast forwarding a little bit because a little bit of a computer variation. But what ends up happening is you basically just give back the material in order to maintain the balance. So castles, and you temporarily sack the knight, but then they also have a hard time getting their own queenside pieces safe. And a position like this with the attack on the rook is just going to keep you safe and keep black with a fine position here. So that's kind of one of the worst case scenarios, but not that bad for us really. Now the reason I also showed this game is because my opponent actually did play virtually all of the best opening moves. He played a4, he played the move of c4. They're not giving me time to just get in c5 and attack in the center, like in the queen d8 c6 first Scandinavian that I talk about in my Play the Strongest Scandinavian course. And by the way, if you do want to look into that course, I have included a link in the description also as a pinned comment, so you can find that easily enough. But yeah, my approach here is like rather than talking about the course, I'd rather just show you the spirit of what it's like, being playing these lines and having success with them as I have done here for many, many years now. So at c4, we obviously don't want to have knight kicked away too soon. And again, knight c3, bishop e7, they can't have enough weaknesses in the position that we're just going to be quite okay really in a position like this, just playing with the d5 outpost. So white goes bc3, and in hindsight, it might have been a little bit more flexible for me to play c5 and play it like this, which is something that definitely I was considering playing in this way. But I also wasn't sure if I necessarily needed to play the move c5 yet, so I decided just to keep my options open and simply get my king to safety first, and then think about c5 later when I've got a bit more development behind it. Which is good in theory. The computer kind of has a slightly different perspective, and point out if you played a somewhat anti-computer, the anti-human move of like c5 to hold back this break. But this is actually a little bit annoying, and that's kind of why I recommend the c5 move first, just to avoid that. The game itself, though, I didn't really end up playing c5, and I have to admit the move didn't really occur to me because I thought, okay, they can play this, but then d5 gets quite weak, and already at this point it's a little bit late maybe for him to play c5 because we also have a little bit of a counter thrust with e5. We're able to, trade the pawns, kind of free up pieces, and just have very good piece play in a position like this. Maybe the knight can even come to d3 at some stage because they're quite poised for that here. Now to bishop c f4 c5, you might be thinking that the move that looks a little bit scary here is the move of d5. And it is true that I haven't really given you all a puzzle just yet, but this is a good opportunity to see if you can play like I did. Because if you don't find the right move here, you might be under a little bit of pressure, but what would be the move that you would play as black? And if you really want to take your chess improvement to the next level, I can suggest putting the move you would play in the comments below. That way you can compare your thought process with what I did in the game, and you're just going to take away a lot more from it. And there's something I do a lot in the course about, like asking you what you play in different key positions, so that when you end up in those sort of typical middle games in your own games, you already know how to play them well, because I already drilled them for you plenty of times. I was about to say like a number, but it would be, well over 100, probably close to 200 almost, but I don't want to exaggerate too much. But yeah, the answer here is that loose pieces drop off the knight on c3 is unprotected, so I played the move of bishop to f6, a nice little intermezzo to put pressure on the pawn, and my opponent just immediately blundered with the move of queen to d2. I was kind of expecting in the game for them to play rook c1 and just defend the knight, get out of the pin. But then we have a few good replies. I kind of like the move rook e8 just to avoid situation we end up with an isolated pawn on e6. Now we can take back with the rook instead. And if they do keep the tension, we're just in a better time to take. And yeah, they do have an annoying passed d pawn, but we can kind of play around it because we do blockade it with the knight. And I think in a position like this, any edge white has is going to be very, very small. So nothing too much to write home about for white. But yeah, instead I played queen d2, and you might have already guessed why that's not such a great move here, because white is going to be a little bit overloaded with the defense of the d5 pawn. I played the move e takes d5 first, and I was expecting my opponent just to take, and it is true I do win a pawn in this case. But the position is kind of simplified enough that white does actually have somewhat decent compensation. Probably would have gone rook b8 and, the game would go on and obviously only black can win, but it's not like white is doing that terribly here despite being a pawn down. Because they will have some piece activity to show for it here. But instead of all that, white played this somewhat nebulous exchange sack, which, when he was thinking for a while, I had a gut feeling he was going to try something creative. But yeah, it doesn't really work that well. I was kind of expecting him to flick in bishop c7, because at least that would be a slightly annoying move to insert, but he just played the automatic rook a1, which gave me the time to sort of take and just not give him time for bishop c7 a second time. Queen d5, rook a7, just make sure to keep the pieces safe. I'm ready to kick away their queen with bishop b7. And the game concluded rather quickly. I mean, it is technically a winning position for black, but admittedly he didn't defend it in the best way either, because after his move of bishop d3, obviously he's trying to create some sort of swindling chance with an attack on the king, which is good in theory, but the problem is that it just doesn't work in practice because it's very nice knight f6 move. I didn't make it a puzzle because there are kind of several winning moves at this point, but the reason behind this is that once they take our pawn, they don't really have another good way to defend the bishop. We have this nice rook d7 move, which is what my opponent missed. If he moves the d6 bishop, we just take the d3 bishop, meaning he's losing one of these bishops, and so my opponent just resigned. Now, just to over-deliver a little bit, I don't just want to stop just with this game, even though I could easily do so. But I want to actually show you a second game that I promised I would cover in yesterday's video. And it was a game that was played between Sokolov, Ray 2595 FIDE, against Jonathan Spielman in a Madrid rapid game in 988. So because it's a rapid game, it's not going to be absolutely the best quality, but just a nice inspirational example. Kind of just completing our coverage of the Icelandic Gambit, which it is true in the actual course I focus on c6 because it's a better move. But I think for the free content, showing a way to play it, it's maybe objectively not quite as strong, but still can give you very good results, is a nice way to tease you for kind of what to expect when playing the Scandinavian. Actually, a move I didn't mention last time is there is also this move of Queen a4, but I kind of doubt you're really going to face it that often. I think black is really just going to be doing quite fine. Queen b7 just doesn't really have the desired effect. And in a position like this, you sack a couple of pawns, but you do get a pretty big lead in development in return. And again, Queen b7 just kind of falls a little bit flat here, because if they do try to take the rook, then yeah, you just kind of attack them, and your attack is just a lot stronger than theirs. This may be not the most essential variation to remember, but I just want to show it just to answer that question for those who may be, looking at the engine lines or something, to see that this isn't anything to fear. But yeah, Sokolov played takes, and like I said in yesterday's video, knight f3 is probably a better move, like we saw in the Quoth game before, but instead, or in the notes to the Quoth game before. But this time white does play d4, and after bishop d2, queen e7. Again, like I said last time, bishop e2 is more the move to play, but for now we do see this sequence where queen e2 was the Quoth Hodgson game that I talked about in yesterday's video. Again, I'll put the link just around so you can find out in case this is the first Scandi video of mine you're seeing. But here white played knight d2 instead. And if you're wondering, can black just take the pawn on fb2? Technically you can, but it's a little bit more effective, in my opinion, to play it the way Hodgson did with knight c6. And you might be wondering, well, can't they just go d5 and just win a piece? But it's actually not quite that simple, because after castles, if they do take one of our pieces, say the knight, then we can play a move like knight e4, and it's actually very hard for white to defend the knight properly. If cb7, just king b8, we just use the pawn as a shield. And if knight f3, we're just going to line everything up, take. rook e8, and they just don't really have a good defense to discovered checks. Because if bishop b2, we can do a little crisscross applesauce of the pins with bishop takes c4. They can't take either way because the absolute pins of the king, meaning that next move we're just going to take their bishop and basically just win the game with our extra material. So it's a little bit of a trap there that can definitely catch out your opponents. In the game, Sokolov played knight f3 and tried to stabilize, trying to do it in this version instead. Unfortunately for white, this still kind of falls really flat, and actually this is a good puzzle to see if you can improve on Spielman's play in this game, because Spielman actually already missed a winning continuation. And I know that sounds crazy when it's only move 10, is really black already winning? But the answer is yes, they are. And if you do want to pause the video, have some time to think about it, and then share your move in the comments, then feel free to do that. It will help you to learn the maximum from this video. Of course, if you're already watching this in the course area, you can put it in the comments there. But yeah, in this case, so the move bishop g4 in the game technically doesn't sort of spoil all that much. Like, you still get compensation, but it would have been so much better for black to play knight takes d5 instead. By the way, if you want to play rook e8, that actually would be pretty good as well here. We're kind of saying that if they take, that even though white is a piece up, they just can't really deal with the crisscross of the pins here. So technically you could play this as well. I'd also accept it as a solution. But knight d5 is the most clinical, because if they take, we're going to take with the bishop here, so we're kind of lining up the attack against the defenders of the knight. And if they play a move like a3, trying to break the pin, because something like bishop e2 and takes is obviously going to be pretty depressing to end up in a position like this where they just can't get out of the pins properly. But a3 doesn't really help that much either, because you can just take the pawn, play queen c3, and you're just going to kind of revert to the same sort of thing, like bishop f3, rook e8, knight d4, and there's just not a lot they can really do about it here, like even just knight d4, which we played before rook e8 just to avoid anything like rook e8, rook b3 kind of counterplay. Knight d4 just cuts that out and just ensures that they're not going to be able to hang on to the extra piece here at the end of the day. So yeah, that's basically would have been already winning. I'll show the rest of the game, even though it does have a few mistakes, because it does show a few typical ideas for the opening. Now here I probably should have bitten the bullet and just taken the knight, because it turns out that as strong as black attack looks, white is one move from castling and will kind of be able to survive based on this here. But instead, white played bishop e2, just trying to avoid complications at all costs. And unfortunately against gambits, if you try to just avoid any sort of calculation, what often happens is you just lose the initiative completely. White has to lose the right to castle now, because bishop e2, knight d4 does win a full piece. So king f1, knight d4 was played. Yeah, you can even take the pawn on b2 if you want to, but Spielman decided to play for maximum piece activity instead, which is also quite good. White plays a move queen c1. Again, it's a rapid game. They're not going to find the best defense, but probably b3. It would be a little bit more of a reliable defense for white by comparison. Which is why, so I mentioned queen b2 as an improvement before. After queen c1, then things start to kind of click together for black. After knight f3. I really like black's next move here. Like, this one makes a really good puzzle for those who really want to challenge and stretch yourselves. But the move is rook e4. We're able to attack the pawn and just really keep white on the defensive. Knight d2 doesn't really help, because we can just bring the rook in and just attack that way. So white plays b3, black takes the open file. White is still a very long way from getting their king to safety. Because you have g3, knight g4, and we're just going to get them this way. Something like this would be an example of some of the tactics at black's disposal. They're using the pin here to win the exchange. So white ends up playing h3 to try to avoid knight g4, but it's also very passive. I think I would probably go queen c5 if I was black, just going for the attack on f2. It's kind of like a little bit of a deadly quiet move that the black is going for. A technique I learned from my first private chess coach, John Paul Wallace, over 20 years ago by now. Knight h5, yeah, it does miss the point a little bit, because g3 does cover it. But even with black not playing it in the best way, even so, this is still a little bit tricky for white to play. White still does have to find some good defensive moves. Again, for the master students, this may be a good one to pause and try to defend it better than Sokolov. but in the game, Sokolov was not up to the task. He played the move of knight g1, maybe just hoping that black would just take the pawn or something, but it turns out we can do better. Black played a really nice move. They played with queen d6. The engine really likes queen b6 for what it's worth, kind of just going for this sort of thing, but queen e6 does also get the job done after rook h2, rook g3. White has a lot of problems really keeping the king safe. Like even queen g6 is going to be a pretty big threat, just hitting the knight and asking white what they're going to do about that. After queen b2, so they're trying to avoid queen f6, but the problem is queen g6. Like I said before, is going to be very strong. And if you are wondering, well, what about the move knight e2 by white? Well, that can kind of be refuted in a few different ways. Probably the most human one is just to go rook f3 and rook f2, rook h3, and just slide the rook in this way to kind of overwhelm their defenses. Because white kind of has the onus of defending their king, meaning that their defenders are not going to be as poised as the black attackers, which have complete freedom to move around, not being constricted by defending the king. Now, after king f2, black just finished it off with rook e3, just lining it up for the lawnmower style mate. After knight e2, black did miss a forced checkmate in three moves, where they could have actually played queen f5 and given a checkmate like this. But what they did also got the job done. After here, black just grabbed the material, following the Botnik principle of taking the material over the checkmate. Black is just up oodles of material and is still attacking the king, and therefore Sokolov resigned here. So yeah, those were the two games I wanted to share with you in this video. This one being a little bit shorter, just kind of a few other things on today. But I hope that, yeah, you had a lot of fun with seeing how this knight f6 continuation plays out. I'm definitely excited for the next videos where I'm going to share with you some more ideas in the Scandinavian defense, focusing a bit more on some of the queen d5 lines for some of the future videos. So you can definitely get excited about that. And yeah, in terms of my Play the Strongest Scandinavian in 2025 course, this one I am selling at a bit of a discount for the next week. So that discount does expire on March 12th. So if that's something that you've decided you really enjoyed this free value and you're looking to take your understanding of the Scandinavian to the next level and just become a much stronger chess player and really improve your results using this kind of opening in my teachings as a tool, then certainly check out the course and you can decide for yourself if that's going to be the right fit for you. But I know for myself, I put a lot of effort in, like it's really a real labor of love. Like I really love the Scandinavian. I love talking about it. I love playing it. I love showing to others how to win with this opening. So yeah, check that one out in the description below. And yeah, I'll see you for the next training. Take care.